Good morning, everybody, and welcome to Office Hours. Good to have you here. If you're watching on YouTube, you can find out more about what we do every day on officehours.global, in fact, 24/7. Our first hour is a general discussion of production-related questions, your questions, and we hope we've added some interesting ones today. The second hour is typically a deeper dive into a topic. Today, in the second hour, we're going to talk about camera trends. So we're going to be looking at general groupings of cameras, kind of by price. I mean, what's at the high end, what's in the intermediate stages, and we're going to talk about things like the camera trends in smart devices, iPhones, and things like that. So all of that's on the table for the second hour. So if you have questions about those kind of things, pop them into the Makana question system. We'll look forward to answering them for you. Right now, it's time to start the regular show. So let's dive into our first question, Mitch.
Thank you, Bill. Our first question in from Tony Mobley in Noonan, Georgia. Is there a way for Apple Books to read aloud content from Library of Purchase books?
Alex is going to start us off.
Yes and no. So there's in kids' books there are some books that have the feature now of read aloud, and so basically the author or somebody else reads the book, and you can have it read a look, and it'll highlight the words as it's doing it, but only with children's books. There's another way to do it, which is to go into accessibility, and you can select you can have it read the text, and you can select the text in the book. But if you have a long book, it's really not a great solution. A lot of us don't know why. That it is this way, that we're not getting the ability to read aloud. We think that it has something to do with licensing, or the ability, once you turn that on, you can't turn it off, and you'll never be able to sell audiobooks, to do that. And so we think that it might be connected to, either protecting a business model or licensing with the book sellers, because it seems like the most obvious thing. Kindle will do it for any Kindle book on a Kindle reader. So a Kindle book will, if you use the hardware Kindle book, it will read the books out loud, all books out loud. If you have the Amazon Echo app on your phone and you ask Amazon, with the word, to play a Kindle book on your phone, it will do it too. But you cannot use the Kindle app on your phone, on your iPhone, to do it natively. It's a very complicated thing. Obviously, I really like listening to books, so I've kind of researched a lot of these pretty heavily. There's also a book, and there's another, and I couldn't find it right before, that I use to read PDFs that will. It's called Genie, I think, Genie Text or something like that. That I use to read long PDFs, and for some reason it just wasn't coming up on my phone. But and you can open a PDF and it'll play the whole thing. The one problem you have is for books that aren't built for playback. There's all the bibliography, there's the captions, there's other things, there's all kinds of other things in the page that it starts to read. So if it's not built for it, if it hasn't been selected as this is what you should read, what I will say is that I actually prefer listening to Kindle books over listening to audiobooks, because I can listen to them faster. The computer voice is more intelligible at speed. When I say speed, 2x or more, it's easier for me to understand what it's saying than a human being, because they're all their little changes and everything else that they bring into it makes it harder for me to absorb the information. So that's but I still have a lot of audiobooks. I have a subscription to Audible, and so I buy, 5 or 10 a month.
Jason Beish.
Alex mostly nailed it. This used to be very easy. Back when books were something that were part of iTunes, there was a services tab that you can still surface if you really want to, that just basically is, turn text into audio. And what that will do is take a text document and render it into spoken word, at your default voice. I haven't done it since they did the music change. I bet it could be done with AppleScript, but Alex covered everything else. The easiest way is still not easy.
Well, almost everything else in this respect, I do a lot of listening to. I listen on Audible. And to me, there's a difference between informational thing where I think a computer voice doing a translation can do that exceptionally well, and I can listen to a lot of things that have been, put through a basically sort of AI system to just read the words out as fast as I need them to. I will say in the best books that I listen to, there is usually an extremely talented reader, and a lot of these people work for Audible and services like them. who can really bring a set of characters to life in a way that distinguishes characters. And it was funny for me because as I started reading, particularly listening to novels, those readers who could truly distinguish characters without moving too far away from their fundamental narrator voice. I mean, they didn't try to cartoonize the fact that the women all sounded way higher than the men and things like that, but they just did subtle differences in personality, really, in a way that's incredibly engaging. I've listened lately to a couple where they take a whole cast, 6 or 7 characters in a book, and they have different people read each character. I actually prefer the single reader doing a high-level performance of that book. I just find it the most engaging process, and I stand in awe of the best of those talented readers.
And I think that my view of it, just to finish this up, is that I have a very strict lanes of where I get content. So fiction for me is TV and film. Like I don't read fiction. To me, it's a waste of time. And so because I can't do a lot of other things, and so it's in a very small little window. And then for me, thought process, thinking about things is what I listen to, and then reference is what I buy. So if I need to reference something, I buy a book that I'm going to look at because I need to look at certain things for data. But if I'm trying to think about concepts or history or other things like that, then it's all audiobooks. And then if I want fiction, I don't want to read a fictional book because I might ruin the movie.
Oh, ouch. To me, that's the difference between prose and poetry. When I'm reading fiction, I'm reading for the poetry of the language. When I'm reading prose, I'm reading for information. And I just separate those into two different things. But each person is different, and we all have, the way we like to consume things. Let's move on to the next question.
Chirag Cheetah from Dallas, Texas has a question. What is the best way to secure a camera tripod to a scissor lift in windy conditions?
And Alex is going to hit us with this.
Yeah, so there's a couple different ways of doing that. Probably the easiest way to do it, and one of the problems you'll have with a scissor lift and a tripod is the spread. So the tripod is not going to, oftentimes will want to spread out more than the scissor lift is wide. And so you're going to have a hard time, getting it there. And so you have two problems. One is the tripod may not be as stable as it wants to be because it can't get all the way open. So it's kind of in a semi-open state. So think about like ones with spreaders may be more problematic than ones without spreaders, where you can kind of control that angle. Now, once you have that, you're going to have a tripod that's kind of at a more vertical and less stable position. So you're absolutely right that if you're going to do anything in a windy condition, you're going to need to stabilize it. You probably need to stabilize it in either 2 or 3 points, maybe on each leg. And one quick and easy way to do this is with Mayfers and magic arms. So if you put Mayfers on, it's a little clamp, and it's, what are they called? Magic super grips, I think, is what Manfrotto calls them, but they're
super
Mayfers.
Clamps. Yeah.
Super clamps. Anyway, so you take a super clamp or a Mayfer, you clip it onto the either 2 or 3 of them, and then you use a magic arm and to put another super clamp or Mayfer and attach it to the tripod, and then tighten those all down. And that gives you the flexibility of kind of getting it to where you want it and then locking it down. And that's probably going to make it just about as stable as it can be in the situation that you're in.
Yeah, I'm going to double down on his stable as it can be, because the scissor lifts themselves often do have a certain variability. And if the wind gets up there, the scissor lift is going to sway a little bit. Plus, you have to be very light-footed. I have found that if you move around on the top of a scissor lift while your camera's on something, you're going to see it.
One thing I learned in Scotland is that we were doing the Open, and there's really high towers that they put up so that the camera operators can get those really high shots. And I said, that it's like 80 feet. Like, how often do they come down, And they said, they stay up there all day. And I'm like, all day? And they said, yes. And I said, even if they have a lot to drink? And they're like, yes. And I was like, oh, I'm not going to get anywhere near those towers. So anyway, that's all I got.
Mitchell.
Yeah, I know it's tempting, but don't use a scissor lift to do a boom shot. It just doesn't work.
Yeah,
no. If you engage the motors on them, you're jerky all over the place. It's very difficult. They're not precision instruments. They're designed for painting ceilings and things like that. Let's move on to the next question.
Douglas Carmichael's in. What is a step and repeat, and where is it used?
Mitch, go ahead.
All right, the step and repeat. It's the scourge on the planet, essentially. But to explain what it is, it's whenever you see a photo op or a sporting event where they're doing a recap, it's the screen you see behind the people, the talent, or the people being interviewed, and it's a repeating logo over and over. It's tiled basically in the background, and yeah, like it is there, except maybe just a little bit worse than that. So the problem with it is it's just insane, boring, bad use of backgrounds. It's usually a little closer to you than you want to be. Bill is smiling because he can sense my frustration here. Alex is probably going to add.
Alex is going to double down on frustration, I suspect.
Step and repeat is bad. Don't do it.
Alex?
Yeah, yes. I was gonna try to say step and repeat is great. It's what everybody needs to use, but I couldn't. It couldn't even come out of my mouth. It is just it's something. It's a I don't know. It's a past based idea. So basically, the reason that step and repeat, and I think that it was already shown, but I'll. This is the kind of the step and repeat that you see a lot of, and sometimes it can be an entire, all the way down a red carpet, and it's either one logo or multiple logos all mashed together, and they're simply stepping over and repeating over and over and over again. And the reason for that is that they want to make sure that no matter what angle, what camera, that the sponsors are getting their logo branded. It's a really old-fashioned way of thinking, and it's really an eyesore. And it's a great way to say, I haven't done anything new for the last 2 decades, and I don't have any new ideas. So I'm going to put a horrible thing behind everybody. It's really bad for compression. It's because all that detail back there causes compression. It's just bad for our eyes. I think that there's actually some optometrists might actually say that if too much step and repeat could damage your long-term vision. It's that bad. And so anyway, again, I think that there's a lot of better ways to do it. And we still do it. I still see it at red carpets and all the things that we work on. But the best red carpets now are getting past that. If you look at what, you don't see a lot of them, but you look at like what Apple's doing with their red carpets, they still have these premieres, like Apple and Amazon's doing some of these premieres. And man, Apple, what did they, for the prehistoric Apple, let's see if they have the prehistoric red carpet. They went, let's see, Apple their prehistoric planet. They took it to an entirely, different level, because they really built something. Here we go. And there's a little bit, so they still have a little bit of step and repeat in it. Let me pull this up. So this is about as good as step and repeat gets. If I swing this over. So there's this is Apple, so that's a made wall outside of a theater. It's not and so there's still some step and repeat there, but it's gotten to be a fair bit better than it was. I think that the way that a lot of these things can get, and by the way, this is just something I found on the web. It's not like I didn't work on this show, but this one, sorry, I didn't realize this one. You can see this is where, and I apologize, this is just the biggest image that I had here. Let me see if I can make it bigger. This is just a very low resolution photo, but this is the future, which is you got a big motif that you can have there with one big logo and a place for someone to stand, and they can take a picture of it and it looks pretty. Like if you want to brand it, you can still brand it. You just don't do it. Apple took it about the best way they could do it, which is some step and repeat, but not crazy step and repeat. And they obviously spent some money on the wall, but a single branded one. And we're seeing this a lot in the primary place for people to stand is in one place, and it only has one logo on it. It's not step and repeat, and that's the future. Or not doing any of it at all and just putting it in the stream, like branding it in the stream. But what they want to do is make sure that all the photographers, videographers, everyone they don't control is branded. Anyway, that's what that's for. I over-answered that, but
Yeah, I agree. It's all about
you
branding.
That I over-answered it.
Well, I'm just saying, no. The point is that it's overused. And in fact, I've been looking at the fashion shows, and it's interesting, their evolution. I saw a little of that in the early days, but then they realized that putting a piece of couture, a dress, a beautiful red carpet dress, in front of that awful background took away from the dress. So for a while, they went back to the simpler things. Now, the latest trend from the Met Ball last year was they just want the fashion in the environment, and they have an area where the person wearing the dress, the star typically, is going to walk around within the crowd, and you will see the background background people as if this is how you would wear it in the real world. So it's a little more realistic and a little less, here's our photo opportunity for you.
Yeah, and,
so,
and the problem is that a lot of the people who write the checks, come from a older generation and a backward, and they have a very backwards view of it. It's not based on current trends, and so even if someone doing the red carpet understands that step and repeat are, historical, they can't change it because the people writing a big check are, from a different generation that doesn't get it. In the ad campaign or in the sponsor campaign, there's a lot, it moves very slow.
All right. Well, we're going to move a little faster, so let's move on to the next question. All
right. From Paul Valhus in Austin, Texas. Alfred is an amazing app for the Mac. Is there an equivalent for the PC world, Android or iPhone?
And Tony Mobley's going to start us out here. Tony? Yeah.
Yeah, so I'm not sure that there is one Window or Android app that does all of the things that Alfred does. It is very, very exhaustive in terms of the things that it can do. It does so many different things, and it seems to do these things extremely well.
Tony, I'm not particularly familiar with it. Can you give me kind of just an overview, top line of what Alfred as a program is there to do?
Well, it is an award-winning app for Mac OS, which boosts the efficiency of hotkeys, keywords, and text expansion. So it's kind of like a Swiss Army knife from the standpoint that it does so many things well for the Mac. And I am not a Windows enthusiast, so I have not seen any one Windows or Android application that does the things that Alfred does well. And even the free version seems to do some amazing things. There is a PowerBook.
A Power Pack, I think.
Power Pack that you can use that does even more applications and functions. So it's really amazing.
So it's like a utility for your machine. Alfred probably referring back to butlers. So it's an assistant that helps you in your interface tasks. Is that what I'm kind of understanding?
Yes.
And you can also even there's a phone remote that you can actually activate Alfred workflows from your phone. So, I mean, there's also a workflow that Apple has, but I mean, it's the workflows that Apple has, but this definitely puts a better interface on it. It's good.
Interesting. Okay. Let's move on to the next question.
And Tony Mobley's in to ask a question from Noonan, Georgia. I'm in training for 2.0. He's referring to office hours there, and I realize I don't have enough monitor space. What is the recommended monitor size?
Alex is going to give you some choices here.
I tend to go with multiple versions of 24-inch. So I have, I don't know, I think 5 of them right now. I stick with 24-inch and then I just get more monitors. So rather than having one big one that I have to figure out where it's going to go, I tend to put more monitors up so that I can, and then set things where they need to be. I find that I used to have big monitors and I found that, you actually have more effective resolution if you have a lot of 4K or even 1080p. A lot of my monitors aren't that expensive and they're 1080p because I'm old and I don't need the text to be so small anyway. So I, these are operational monitors. And so I don't, a lot of the side monitors that I use are all like 1080p. They're not very expensive. I'd rather buy a bunch of inexpensive ones and have them up all the time than less expensive ones. So that's, so mine are usually $200 or $300 and I put them up on stands and I have usually 1 or 2 4Ks that I use, but most of them are lower resolution and just hold the things that I need to hold.
Tony, do you have a follow-up on that?
Yeah, I was just wondering, right now I'm using my Mac Mini for USB-C and HDMI. And so those are the only 2 monitors that I have access to. Is there a way to add an additional monitor to?
There is not, I wouldn't use it for production, but for you to have more monitors, there is a, what is the name of the, I have it over here, I think. Sorry, I just had to grab it. It is, this is the pluggable. And people have had some varying success with it. So it's not always 100%, but this goes into USB-C, and it'll give you 2 monitors out of that one. And I don't know whether people were having trouble with using 2 of those because they were trying to get 4 outs out of it. But I think it'll work okay if you use just 1 USB-C and 2 of those outputs. That should get you a 3rd monitor.
Fair enough. Let's move on.
And next question in from me. I'm asking, my teleprompter is picking up white content and reflecting it into my lens. What to do?
That's pretty much always an angle of incidence, angle of reflection thing on your monitor. I would ask just to start out, do you have some sort of hood or surround between the lens and the back part of the mirror of the teleprompter? Without that, it's really easy for that beam splitter mirror to pick up room reflections and various things.
This is actually getting it from the monitor below, in the teleprompter, right?
Yes.
Mitch? Yeah, yes. So this is...
Go ahead, Alex. Yeah.
You can't do white. Like that's why you don't... It's a dark mode. So you have to use dark mode in it, and you will... you can, there's a couple, the only way to really manage that well is to lower the brightness of your monitor, but it's going to light up that to some degree. Also make sure that your the glass itself is very clean, because part of what's reflecting sometimes in front of you is actually the dust that sometimes builds up on the reflection glass. But we've always had a problem with white backgrounds on a teleprompter. Shows up in the frame, changes. We've seen it. The worst one is that it'll change just a little bit. So if you're shooting an interview and suddenly things pop up that are white, the interviewee just gets a little brighter and a little darker, and you don't really notice it. And it
means a mini key light.
There's a lot of posts. That's all I got to say to fix that. So you find the frame where it happened, and then you have to change it's ugly. So yeah, that's been a kind of a problem since the beginning of time in a lot of ways.
Mitchell Hill?
Yeah, it shows up as a ghost, like right through here.
Yep. Yeah, just don't use white.
So, yeah, the dark mode is your friend.
No panelist can wear a white shirt. That's how it works.
All right,
yeah, exactly.
let's move on.
Want to see Robles from Mexico City, Mexico. So, September 7th, Apple event. We will have special coverage or just watch party.
John Prado's got to start us off here.
I'm not sure about what we're going to do, but I'm just wondering what the panel's view was on what far out is alluding to.
Well, they're mostly talking, I read some stuff about it this morning, they're mostly talking about phones and or maybe watches in this keynote. We don't know for sure, but that's the general rumor thing. Alex, do you have any insights?
I think it's going to be ultra dark, like being able to take pictures at night, cool. Like that, so... I looked at it. That's what I think is going to be. I have no idea. I'm just making that up. But that, you have one of the 2 competitive areas in cameras right now is resolution and its sensitivity to light. So if Apple, there's been some rumors that Apple's going to increase the size of the chip, the sensor inside the camera. If they do that, they may be able to get more dark, be able to shoot in the dark, so to speak. And so when I saw it, I was like, maybe they're talking about being able to do nighttime, shooting of the stars and so on and so forth, which the current 13 actually does pretty well. I took some pictures of the sky. We were far enough away from our house that we could, see that kind of Milky Way streak when we were up in Bodega Bay, and we all stopped. And fortunately, there was a meteor shower at the same time. So it's not the biggest meteor I've ever seen. But it was, I took the phone just to see what it would do, and it actually did a pretty good job. So I think that going after dark mode, the other possibility could be telephoto lens. But again, most of the competition for these phones now is the camera. That's what people are buying a camera that happens to have some phone functions in it. We will do a second hour. I have I have to be somewhere in LA at 11:30. So most likely I can do the first hour with everybody. And hopefully most of it will get sorted out by then. But we'll definitely do an after hours breakout room.
Cool. I was reading some stuff on, I think, was it 9 to 5 Mac? One of those. And one of the pundits said there may be breaking iPhones into 2 classes in the next one. There will be 2 models 14 that don't have much different cameras, but then the Pro level they're talking about a substantially larger sensor, like 30% larger or something like that. So that could be exactly what I was talking about. A lot more light sensitivity.
At a substantially larger price.
Yes.
You know, I think that you're going to see I think the top end will be between $2,500 and $3,000.
Ooh, interesting. Well, most people wrap them into their monthly payments, so yeah, that could be a doubling almost. It'd be interesting to see how it works out for them. Let's move on to the next question.
Steve Urov from Madison, Wisconsin. Steve asks, what characteristics and features should one look for in a microphone boom arm? What makes the ElGato Wave worth 5 times the cost of a basic Amazon product?
Jason Bates is going to start us off, then Mitch.
I mean, it's pretty simple. If the microphone is, doesn't make any sound when you move it, and it doesn't kind of like get weird, it doesn't, start to droop, then yeah, I suppose it's a substitute. Personally, I really, really like these extremely expensive. And if you think ElGato's expensive, you are just at the very, very bottom. So you've got plenty of room to go up. Personally, I like the ones that Heil makes, and those are $200. Does anyone know what the ElGato costs?
$99.
Yeah, so I'm not sure if I'm going to be much help here. Amazon is good, but I wouldn't trust it with my microphone.
We're going to give Mitch a moment to weigh in, and then Alex will finish this up.
Yeah, my style is to keep the mic out of the shot. I know I'm not typical of everybody else, but basically I have a boom pole that mounts my camera, and that's right here. It goes straight up. And then I have a GatorWorks expanding boom attached to the boom, the vertical boom, and that keeps it below the level of my screen here. That's the GatorWorks frame device. I think we have a shot of that if you want to see a little bit better than I had it. And then behind me, I have that's the GatorWorks there. It just happens to be mounted in the center point like a stand. And then behind me, I've got a big U87 hanging off a blue frame. I forget the brand name. I think it's called a Compass. And it's like $99. There it is. And it's pretty substantial. And the thing you look for when you put a boom like that on your microphone, first of all, can it carry the weight? And in my case, the U87's about as heavy as they get. And the other is it shouldn't have springs in it, at least not on the outside. But you don't want to have a boom that when you move it, you hear the screaming springs groaning through the weight of the device.
And Alex.
Yeah, so part of it is a lot of us like underslung so that the mic can sit down here and it doesn't get in the way of my monitors. So I use, so for me, I kind of don't pay attention to the overslung mic stands. They work fine, but if you look at if you look at a Joe Rogan podcast for sports things, radio shows, almost all of them are some version of an underslung arm, so that they get out of the way of the cameras, they get out of the way of the monitors, and allow them to do that. So that's kind of the first thing we do, and then that becomes more expensive than the scissor arms that you're kind of used to. I have an ElGato Wave as well as a Ultima. This is the one that Jason was talking about, the OC White Ultima, and the ElGato is not the Ultima. Like it's good. And we use it in the office, and I took it down there and I took it to test because I was like, everyone's getting Ultimas. I'm getting these Waves. And I was like, I ought to know the difference. Build quality and dexterity of the Wave is not nearly the same as the Ultima. But at $99, if I was going to send something out to someone, or if I was going to use it in a second or third place, I would absolutely buy the Wave, because I don't think I'd want to spend $350 over and over and over again for the heavier arm. But I use this arm, the Ultima arm, 6 to 8 hours a day for meetings, and so it's a good investment for me.
Yeah, I actually break all the rules, but that's because I've had this mic boom arm for probably 35 years now, and it's an OC White, but it's one of their earlier spring models, and, I can adjust a lot of things, and you won't hear anything, even though my mic is live. Occasionally, you may hear a tiny bit if you're in headphones or something like that, but normally you're going to position it, and once you position it so that you keep things like the cables out of the shot, you don't move it So I swing it away every day. I swing it back in, and it works. But generally speaking, if I was going to buy today, I would buy one of the higher end, more damped arms, and I wouldn't go with this. But that's one thing. The good ones are an investment. They can last you decades.
And one thing to note is, like, for instance, with this arm that I have here, this is the OC White one. I've got at almost every joint, I have a Allen wrench adjustment to adjust how tense it is. It's just, I really wish it didn't swing this way. So I tighten it up a little bit. And sometimes I put something heavier on it. And so then I loosen it or tighten it. And so I have a lot of control over every joint and how it fits together. And that's the kind of thing that I need for what I do on a day-to-day basis. But most people probably don't.
And Mitch,
yeah, it's interesting because on our webcast here that we do with Office Hours, generally because of super sourcing, our heads have to be right here, and it's almost the same spot every single time. So when I push the idea of a boom arm, I don't need to move it. I could, move it a little bit to the side and the other side, but it just needs to be right where it is, and it serves me very well. I don't need to be, disc jockeying it around to make a point. So in my case, it might be like Bill's. It might not be as useful as an underslung articulated arm, but it puts the mic where it needs to be.
Fair enough. Next question.
John Snyder from Reno, Nevada. Sometimes my Mac stops recognizing the Atem Mini as a webcam. The only solution I've found is to reboot the Mac. Sometimes it takes several attempts. Has anyone else on the panel had this problem or found a fix?
Alex has some thoughts.
I've had that problem, but I found that restarting the Atem was the thing that was required. So we restarted, unplugging the Atem, both the power and the USB-C has to be both unplugged or it won't work. So you completely disconnect it and then plug it back in. And I found that has fixed that problem. It happens about maybe about once a week. We think that it probably has something to do with the bit. So it's probably happening every 32, 64, 128 times that it just gets to it and something isn't getting back over that hump, but we don't know exactly what that is.
And Mitch?
I had a similar problem, and I used to just turn off the Atem with a master power switch. I have a Furman that's driving it all. Not quite good enough. You have to unscrew the connector on the back of the Blackmagic Atem and remove it because there might be a little residual power left in that little brick, and that might keep it awake enough to continue to fail on you.
Okay, well, hopefully those are enough tips to get you past the problem to solving it. Let's move on to the next question.
Tony Mobley is here from Noonan, Georgia. Tony asks, has there been conversation about the 900 days of office hours coming soon?
And the man who started it, Alex Lindsay, is going to weigh.
I think that we may have to celebrate that. Well, we can decide what we want to do. We may have to celebrate it on Sunday as opposed to Saturday. Saturday is I think it's September 10th, I was told, which I was surprised at. So September 10th, I think, is it. We're also covering IBC that morning. And I have a show potentially that day. So I'm uncertain, what, I don't even know if I'll be on, that day. So all of those things are colliding, but I think we can celebrate it a little bit, but I think that the larger retrospective will probably happen on Sunday, not on Saturday, but we'll celebrate it, that we did it. But I think that we can look back at 900 probably either a day before or a day after. Maybe it might even be Friday. We can decide which way we want to go, but people can let me know, but we get one day or the other is probably where we're going to go to talk about it.
And Mitch just popped in, wants to say something.
Is it possible to do it like the Tonight Show, best of, throwing the tomahawk? Or
do we have to wear tuxedos?
Yeah,
I have a tomahawk.
Or shirts.
I have a tomahawk.
There we go. That'd be perfect.
I'm okay at throwing it, but I used to.
Thanks for the warning.
Yeah, exactly.
Is it a throwing tomahawk? That's the real question.
It is. That's all I do with it. So anyway, so the I don't, it's not like I throw it at my neighbors or something. I like throwing tomahawks as targets. so I've been doing it since I was a kid. So anyway, it's not like it doesn't look old. It's more modern. Anyway, so we could do that, but I don't know if I'd do it on air. I'm not that good.
Okay.
Flamethrower.
Well, something will happen on or around 900 to mark our passage into the last centenary of our shows before we get to the big four figures. So excellent. Let's move on to the next question.
And Steve Montaigne from Madison, Wisconsin is here to ask the question, Insta360 Link use case question. Can it be mounted upside down and rotated to right side up image, either physically or through software?
I think Alex is the only person we know who has one on the panel right now. So, Alex?
Yeah, you should be able to. I haven't tried that. I mean, I saw that. I didn't have time to run out and grab it and hang it upside down, but there should be no reason why you could not hang it upside down. You have full control over looking up, down, side, and around. It's a PTZ camera. So you should be able to hang it over top. I was actually thinking about when we eventually get back into cooking is to use one of those as because what we do when we're doing bigger cooking activations is we hang a whole bunch of PTZs over the cooking range. And so I think these could be really useful for that. So we'll see.
Okay, fair enough. Next question.
Paul Valhus from Austin, Texas. If you have to spend or send a PC, Mac, laptop, and desktop, or phone off for repairs, who do you trust?
It's an interesting question. You know, there's been a lot written and a lot talked about over the last maybe 4 or 5 years about what's called the right to repair. The community, particularly in regard to Apple, because Apple has always been a very closed system, and they don't really want you, or at least they didn't for many years, and probably still don't want you opening up things and fiddling around in the computers. It's kind of the opposite of I'm going to build my own so I can take things out and replace them all the time. These have generally been closed systems. But this right to repair movement has gotten a good little bit of traction out there, and recently we've seen Apple have to change some of their practices by virtue of regulation and some of the jurisdictions they do business in, where they actually now are kind of forced to sell parts and let other than just the Apple store and that repair process give a shot at this. I don't think there are a ton of them, but in most major markets, I'm seeing Apple repair things that look like they do things correctly spring up. So I think this is changing. Alex, your thoughts on this?
I never send any of my electronics out to be fixed. If I can't fix it at home, I'll let it die. Security wise, it's a horrible idea. Like, it's just, just so you know, like, once you're handing physical, the only way that you can put a lot of things on a computer is physical access to the computer. And the risk that you run taking it out, even I won't even take it to an Apple store. Like, it's, if I can't fix it, it dies, and that's the end of it. and so and I have a lot of Macs, and I don't have to worry about it that much. Now, I'm fine with getting a new one. So if I have like something that I can go in and hand them a phone that I've blanked, and they give me a new one, that's fine. That's fine for me if I'm pulling it out of the box. But I don't buy used PCs or Macs. I don't, or phones, and I don't, it's a huge security risk to do it, and you should take that very seriously. About what you're putting at risk for specifically things that you're going to put passwords and other things into. It happens more than you think. If you're not a Target and you're in an average place, you're probably fine. But you have to really think about it a little bit before you do that.
That's actually very good advice. Yeah, well, we do have our entire lives. We have Social Security numbers, driver's licenses, all sorts of, biometrics makes it a little harder to deal with that. But if somebody asks you for a password or some kind of root access because you have to fix it, you're probably in a very dangerous zone there. That's different than the key. I have a sticky keyboard, and can you swap out the key? But
once you give someone a thread, and the thing is the people who are smart won't do anything with it for a long time. Because once they get a thread in there, they're not going to go. The dumb ones do something with it, next week. The smart ones do it 2 years from now. And they that's how you weave everything in. You get all the passwords, you get all the emails, you get all the things, and you slowly tie all that back together. And now, you're really it can take. The problem is people aren't very clear of how bad it can be, but it can take you years, sometimes a decade, to get back out of the hole if someone really digs into that. And for me, it's not worth that risk. The chances are low, but the risk is extremely high of what can happen when someone has physical access to your hardware.
Let's move on to the next question. Hopefully that gave you some food for thought.
It did. Chris Widener from Lafayette, Indiana asks, anyone used a Prompter People teleprompter is looking for a rapid deploy teleprompter?
And Mitch Hill has some thoughts.
Prompter People is one of the best manufacturers of prompters of all shapes and sizes. You can also look at ICANN with a K, Glide Gear also makes some nice stuff, and I'm sure there's a bunch of other companies too. Unfortunately, Courtney's not here, the prompter king, to answer some specifics on this, but there's a lot of them. And nowadays, a modern teleprompter, they're all pretty much quick to get out and deploy.
Interesting. You have a picture one that doesn't use a beam splitter that's just hanging an iPad under there. That I've seen people do that a good little bit. In fact, I've done it with executives if the shot is right and I don't have to worry about eye contact. But let's have Jason weigh in, and then Alex is going to finish this up.
Yeah, prompter people is kind of the Rolls Royce of teleprompters, and the larger it is, the less rapidly it deploys. Period. Like, again, period. Like, you've got to be really, really, really careful. Anything over tiny little 3x5 note card sized, and you're just, you have to treat it truly like you're treating, a crystal, something like a champagne flute. I think they are truly the best.
Alex?
Yeah. So the problem really is with the one that you showed there is that you will have the eyes going down below the camera or above the camera when you deploy it. And so it's not that without the beam splitter, you're not going to get the eye contact that you're looking for. So that's the real challenge there. You can do that with any monitor. And I think the problem really is that what I find with teleprompting is that the iPad versions I haven't been super happy with. There's a little bit of lag, just enough. Now with continuity and some of the other things that are happening, it may be faster and better now than what we've had in the past. But we've not been super excited. And I use the teleprompters more as an Interrotron than I do as a teleprompter. And so I want to be able to put a video in there. And so usually I go back to a monitor for that. There's lots of little monitors, Lilliput's and all kinds of other stuff. What we did to do a teleprompter, by the way, is if you have we printed, the Lilliputs have 1/4-20s on two sides, top and side. And so what we did is we printed these little pieces that basically were kind of a square, and you could attach them here and attach them on the back, kind of with a little piece that goes around it. And we just printed a little slot like this, and then gave them a little bit of, something to throw over it. And these were for the 10-inch Lilliputs. This would be and you put your camera in here. These were stuff you could put in your backpack, because we would just get a little piece of glass that we'd slide in there, and this would take about 10 minutes to put up in front of a camera, and it would. The only problem with it is printing them is hard because the big flat area and it tends to warp. So we've often thought about machining that, but just never got around to it. So we didn't need them as much later for those ones that are really small. But you can definitely build things. Remember that teleprompter is just a piece of glass at 45 degrees. So
all right, let's move on to the next question.
And from Tony Mobley in Noonan, Georgia, how often should XLR cables be replaced, and what should you spend for a quality cable?
Mitch is going to start us, then John Preto.
Yeah, other than a obvious visual inspection of the cable where it's cracking or falling apart, sometimes you can't see whether there's a cold solder joint inside the XLR. You might wiggle a little bit in here if there's some buzzing or sound going on in your headphones. But if you start out with a good quality cable, like a Star Quad cable, or a good connector like a Nutric, then you're in pretty good shape there to start. As far as cost, depending how long it is, might be between $100 and $200 for a halfway decent, like a Mogami or a Star Quad cable.
John Preto.
As soon as your bird bites through the XLR cable, it's time to replace it.
Actually, it's a minute before the bird bites through the cable.
Avian aficionados have an issue here, I believe. Alex?
Yeah, I mean, if you're building them, Star Quad with Neutrik connectors are the way to go. I look for things that have Neutrik connectors if I'm buying them, if I'm not building them, mostly because it usually says that the rest of the cable's probably in a pretty good position, but you're looking for people who make them with Star Quad and Neutrik, and you want to see those words on that cable. Another one that when all else fails, I mean, they are very expensive, but actually not that overpriced are the Mogamis. The Mogami cables are very high quality cables, we've had some of them. I think I've had some Mogami cables for 15 or 20 years. So it's, they're very well made. And nothing goes wrong with them. But at this point, I think we build a lot of them at this point. I think the last 5 years have been almost all hand built.
Yeah, building saves you a lot of time and a good bit of money, or takes a little bit of time, but saves you a lot of money.
Well, and it also gives you flexibility. Like, so this is a good example. My mic right now, I cannot, that's the one problem with the Ultima. I can't run the cable into the Ultima. There's one place where there's no way to get it, get it through here without having, without actually building the cable. so I have to, and so I haven't gotten around to it, but it's been hanging here for a while because I changed something on it. It's because I'm using a very specific kind of bracket. Anyway, so you can also build the cable into what you're doing, and just especially if you have to pull the cable through something that's small, so that you get on the other end and make it work.
We just have about 10 more questions to go. We got 15 minutes, so we're going to increase the pace here a little bit. Let's get to the next question.
Chris Widener, Lafayette, Indiana. For a driving shot, I've got a headrest mount for Magic Arms. Went to order a couple more, and they don't make them anymore. Does anyone have a similar metal alternative? I want to stay away from plastic.
I would imagine that there's grip gear out there that you could form something, but I don't know anybody else that has a specific headrest mount for that. I mean, headrests are also different. It would be kind of tough to do it, and I don't see that anybody else has any suggestions here, so that may be a tough one. Yeah, I guess most headrests, we're looking at that picture of a DSLR mount. So if it connects to the pole, then there are a variety of small clamps and small arms that are friction arms that could probably do that. I would probably do one from both sides and make it more of a goalpost, because I would think that if you're driving and you want an active shot, I would want more rather than less support for the DSLR style camera. But I think you're in rig your own, and there's plenty of grip gear to do that. Look at the MarkerTech catalog or any of the big catalogs. You'll find tons of those kind of things that'll help you out. Alex, you had some thoughts?
Cine-milled universal headrest mount. You can get it at BH for about $170.
Excellent Google foo there, or whatever you use to search it. Let's move on to the next question.
From Santa Bart Gaffney from Oconomowoc, Wisconsin, I believe that is. Can one of the panel members show that small camera with the gimbal again? It was shown on a previous office hours not long ago.
I think that's the new camera that Alex has. Do you have it nearby, Alex, or is it?
Where did I put that? Oh,
that's kind of,
yeah,
not
it's
a
so small. It's hard to get.
Hold that camera.
The Insta360 is what we're talking about.
Hold this question. I'll be right back.
Okay, so
it's just right on the other side of my table. I just got to run around the other side.
Okay, so
we'll just hit cancel. There we go. And then go to just drag it down one. Here we go. We'll drag it down. There we go. Just do that.
Okay, good. Suddenly we're on a different question. Mitch, can you make that happen?
Todd Reynolds from North Adams, Massachusetts. I'll be opening a run of Leonard Cohen Doc Hallelujah in a local Indy theater, not understanding how booth audio processes work. Where do I start on my quest to jack into their 5.1 with my mix?
Oh, that's a complicated question. So you're trying to do an insert of a 5.1 into a local theater. Boy, the back end of theaters are complicated, and the audio is usually pretty hardwired. I haven't been in something that allowed a patch bay in the last part of it ever, really. Most of those are pretty built-in systems, and whatever comes from the distributor of the film fits into that theater's processing system. I would just go to the physical theater, ask for the manager, undoubtedly, because I don't even know if they're going to have a technician on site, and see if you can get an interface. Alex, have you done this?
Yeah. So now the question is you want to get the 5.1 for them. Now that's going to be, it's just 5 channels. So you just need to get 5 channels out and have them send it. This isn't, or 6 channels, not 5.1, 6 channels. And so it's just a matter of pulling, getting you got to have them route those 6 channels. So you'll have your right, left, center, LFE. But
is there usually a mixer
right.
or something in a commercial theater that they're going to be able to patch in? In a commercial theater,
they should have, if they have, so the only way, if what they're getting is an HDMI that's then being split out to 5.1. So if they have a 5.1 system and they have an HDMI, then what you're doing, you need something that's going to split that out and process that. So we've done this with a lot more channels, 514, 714, 916 with, there are a handful of AV receivers that will take Atmos or anything else and instead of having amplified outputs, what they have is XLR outputs. There's a handful of AVRs. Monoprice makes one, and there's a couple other companies that make them that basically have the XLR outs of each one. Now, the problem with that, if they're processing any more than 5.1, is that those outputs are tuned to the room that you're going into. So they may not be as accurate. So, but
this is going to be, I think, I would definitely go early. And you might take a camera along with you. Go take a bunch of pictures if they'll give you access to this stuff. And then come back here with a lot of pictures and say, if I was facing this interface, how would I attach to it? Because
definitely knowing exactly what the signal flow is what you're going to need to figure out. If they're building their own mix, it's easy to get the 6 channels out. If they're taking an HDMI mix, you're going to have a way for it to split it.
Yeah, it's going to be a little complex. So start early and test often. Let's move on to the next question.
And we're back to Santa Bart's question, talking about the Live 360 Link camera.
Alex,
has that?
Are you ready?
I'm ready. Okay.
He's unzipping his case.
I have it in a huge case. I have this old mic case, this Countryman mic case that I was using to put it in because I didn't know how to pack it. So this is one of the that's the only real problem that I have with this. So here's the little guy, and I think that you can just hang it upside down and it'll work just fine. So we'll test that a little later. But this is the little the Insta360 Link. As a webcam, it's the one I'm the happiest with right now. This is what I took on the road, and I'll take on the road in a couple of weeks, and I'll show it to you. You'll see me join again from LA with this little guy here. The only thing that I'm having trouble with is figuring out how to pack it because it's my travel camera. So now what I'm doing right now is I realized I still had the box that it came in, that it fits in. So what I'm doing is I'm going to build a 3D model of this interior and then build out a soft little box that I can, it's a little bit of a construction. So I'm going to 3D print this interior, and then I'm going to put felt in it, and then I'm going to drop this into it and make it like a little box that I can put into something else. Because otherwise, it's just really hard to travel with, and they don't make a case for it. I think that's probably the biggest missing thing that they did with this camera is no case.
Okay.
Anyway, it's great.
Yeah, let's move along. We've still got a bunch of questions and not too much time. So next question.
Dave Burke, Alexandria, Virginia. And Dave asks, is there a way to create bokeh effects on backgrounds that's only 3 to 5 feet behind the subject? I'm trying to stage my home office primarily for Zoom meetings.
And Mitch.
Yeah, in my case, I'm using an FX3, and my background's maybe more like 6 feet behind me. But you need a large sensor camera, and you need a decent lens so you can open that iris up and make this stuff happen.
Alex, can you do it in 45 seconds?
I can. You can use, again, what Mitchell said, you can get some lenses that are 1.2, 1.4. You're going to be able to open up that aperture to get a really short depth of field. The problem is you have to be very precise about where you sit after that because you can be leaning back and forth and lean very quickly out of it. So as you shorten it to get that out of focus, the problem you're going to have is you being out of focus. And so you have to be very careful of that.
Fair enough. Thank you. Let's move on to the next question.
Stefan Fischer from Würzburg, Germany. Problem solved. My mixpre 6 refused to play back recorded material. It was connected to my Mac via USB to power it and use it as an audio interface. As it turns out, the Audio-Midi-Setup, which is the Mac app, was set to 44.1 instead of 48. And I was correct in answering.
Sample rate mismatch. That's one of the things that always causes some clicking issues. Alex, do you have another thought about that before we move?
Mitchell wins.
Yeah, good. Well done, Mitchell. Next question.
Douglas Carmichael. If you're exporting a DCP but don't have 5.1 mixing skills, can most cinema processors accept stereo content?
Alex.
They can accept it, but it's problematic. And the reason for that is that the third channel, typically either third or fourth channel, depending on the cinema, will be the center track, and that's where all the vocals should go. So people talking should be coming largely down that center track. So if you have the right and left, it means that you're actually giving them a mix that doesn't make as much sense.
Yeah, I'm almost wondering if collapsing it to mono would be better if you have to spread it around 5.1 things so you don't get any phasing.
Again, the main thing is getting Yeah, you can. I mean, we definitely have things that go out in stereo, but I don't think they sound nearly as good. I mean, even just getting that third track for center is a big deal.
Okay. Next question.
Paul Valhus in Austin, Texas. There was a question on tech sources the other day, e.g. techmeme, but no one mentioned Guy Kawasaki's alltop.com. Is it the go-to place for tech news and trends?
Well, it's interesting. I haven't read anything from Guy in quite a while. Alex, have you?
I used to go. I just didn't find as much news that I wanted to do. It felt like something. The problem with Guy Kawasaki is he's a marketer, and he markets things really heavily, and he kind of pushes it down on everything. And I just never knew what I was actually looking at there. So that's why I didn't use it as much as techmeme, which is what I use.
There you go. Let's move on to the next question.
Stefan Fischer from Würzburg, Germany. Does the panel have any recommendations for handle-like power banks? For example, to attach it to the pavotube 6C?
Well, there's tons of power banks, the small ones that are in kind of a barrel form factor. So I would imagine it wouldn't be too hard to use a couple of little like hose clamps and cobble something together that would put that on a handle really easily. Alex, have you found a more elegant solution?
No, I mean, I hook them straight to some kind of power source as opposed to a power bank. There's already a battery in them that will last about 2 hours. And then I usually find a way to get a USB cable to them. I haven't seen ones that you attach. This is actually a relatively a bank handle. I mean, the ones that I use typically are something like a anchor for ones that are smaller. And then I got a Jackery because Chris Widener got one. And I really like it. It's really big, but that's a much larger one. But if you need just a smaller power bank, again, I would try to find a power source if you really want them to go longer than 2 hours.
Fair enough. Next question.
And for me, a small bug in my M1 Mac. Occasionally, the keyboard updates very, very slowly. Reboot fixes this, but would like to avoid that.
Jason has a thought.
Yeah. So which keyboard are you using?
The Bluetooth M1 add-on.
I've never heard of it with, like, assuming it is a somewhat modern one, which that one looks like it is. Your best bet would be a master reset, which means, let it die, charge it all the way up, and then disconnect it completely. Like, shut off Bluetooth, really. Turn it all the way on both units and then repair it. I've never seen that fail.
That's a good suggestion. Also, don't forget on the Mac, you have activity monitor. So if you put up a little window on the side and watch what the processors are all doing, you might find that it happens after some process happens. I've occasionally found something that was interrupting a normal process in my Mac by scanning the activity monitor's log. So that's just another thought. Mitchell?
Yeah, just real quick. When I'm typing, the typing slows down to a crawl. It takes, I can type something and look, and 30 seconds later, it's finally finished.
Should be able to see the cycle count if you go all the way in, like, about this Mac, and then go to System Report, plug the keyboard in, and it should show the battery cycle count. If that is copacetic, if you're under, I don't know, maybe, what do you think, Alex? Maybe 500 cycles? Like, I've never seen a keyboard get that high, but yeah.
I haven't seen that.
Okay, let's move on to the next question.
Stefan Fischer from Würzburg, Germany. The Zendure Powerbank delivers 2,600, 800 milliamp hours for all kinds of devices. Compared to other power banks with the same capacity, it's almost 5 times more expensive. Does the panel think it's worth the price?
And Alex?
I think it's 26,800, and I might just buy one while we're talking here. It looks like, yes, so I think it is. It's got, number one is it does 100 watt output. So regardless of what it can store, it can actually run a laptop, to push it out, which is unique. It also has an LCD screen that tells you what each port is doing and how much it's drawing and everything else. And so I think it's actually pretty cool. I actually didn't even know that this company existed until you asked this question, and I'm now super excited.
There you go. We found another excellent way to spend money here at Office Hours, something that we do extraordinarily well. I believe that takes care of all of our first hour questions. So thank you all for participating today. We're going to, in the next minute or so, move ourselves over to our discussion of cameras, current camera trends. But for right now, we appreciate your being here. And don't forget, what's happening tomorrow? Is tomorrow's show? I didn't
about 2.0.
Oh, and 2.0. Okay, so good. A lot of you will want to come around here and give us a listen tomorrow, and then of course on Saturday it's more 2 hours of questions, and on Sunday the philosophical day that lets us kind of take our shoes off, sit around in our socks, and wander through more philosophical discussions. So all that's coming up. Okay, it's the top of the hour, and so for this Thursday, I decided that it would be interesting to survey, because I hadn't looked around for a while and seeing, what's out there. We know there are a lot of cameras out there, but they're in a lot of different classes, and the camera industry has been kind of disrupted pretty heavily. For most of my career, we knew who the 3 or 4 manufacturers were for, Betacam type rigs, shoulder rigs. We knew that people were, early shooting on film, but then as they moved into the high-end cameras, there was that class of people. But there really wasn't much other than professional, industrial, broadcast, and a couple of things. Well, the camera industry now is much more fragmented. And I kind of considered that there was going to be some groups. And so maybe this would just be something I just want to go through these really quickly, and everybody can kind of just get an idea of the 5 groups that I think we should have little bits of discussion about. These are not necessarily the best cameras. I'm just trying to get an example of the type of thing that are in these things. So in Group A, let's show that on screen, we have high-end cameras, and I'm considering these anything that's like $20K for the body and up. And these are the ones used for professional movies. We have the Era Alexa, the Red Raptor, the Sony Venice. These are used to do Hollywood-style features. They require a lot of outboard gear. They're usually used by highly technical cinematographers and people. They have tremendous amounts of adjustment, and they can take on almost any kind of project you would imagine, but they're very expensive. And you notice up in the top on the Alexa 4K, I just saw an ad for a basic set that a true cinematographer would use, and it was up close to $100,000. So that's what they're using to make the full-scale movies out there. Let's move to the next slide here. Group B is kind of the high end of industrial. And so these are ENG cameras. They're still around out there in the big form factor. They run usually between $15,000 and $25,000. Companies like Panasonic, Sony, and JVC make these kind of things. They are increasing their resolution into 4K and things like that. But this is the kind of thing that news broadcast stations used to run. Let's move on to the next one. Group C is the next step down from that, and that is kind of the more industrial camera kind of thing, basic industrial. You can get these things for $5,000 to $10,000. Canon C300 was a really popular camera in this line, around $10,000. Panasonic and Sony's F series, very popular. And these prices are just kind of generic averages, but you can see it's a tier down. They're really highly capable cameras. But I do think they're falling a little bit out of favor now. And we'll talk about that after we go through this just kind of quick overview. Let's go on to Group D. Here's some DSLR and mirrorless cameras. This starting with the 5D Mark II, this took over the world. And people are going, my gosh, in my DSLR, I can get a great video picture. And this thing ruled the roost for some years here. This is how everybody who couldn't afford to play in the big boy toys did their video. The Canon 5D originally, but the 6D Mark II is the one out there. And so you're talking about $2,000, $3,000 in that. Although I will note the Panasonic GH5, which a lot of people absolutely love as one of the new mirrorless video cameras, is only $600. So for people who wanted to do content and didn't want to spend a lot of money, that's a very powerful option. And now Group E, which we all know and love, it's the fast racehorse passing the pack right now, has to do with smartphones and smart devices. I don't see that updating, but everybody knows that right now a ton of content is being shot on pocket cameras, the iPhone line, obviously, but also the Samsung Gallery, the Pixel 5 from Google, Galaxy, and as I was doing research for this, I hadn't even seen this Sony Xperia Pro thing down here at the bottom, but it's, $2,000 retail. They surprisingly made it exactly the same price to purchase as the iPhone 13 Plus there. So just over $1,000, right at $1,000. But I note down there on the bottom, look at that. It's got HDMI in and out. It's got a waveform monitor and false color. All that did was signal to me that the phone manufacturers take their cameras so seriously that they're gunning for everything above it except for probably the Millennium DXL. Now, there are reasons the industrial cameras are a better solution if you're content creating than these phones. But this is where the energy, I think, undeniably is going in terms of people being able to get to things and shoot. Okay, let's go to questions. Alex has the thought before we go too far.
All I'd say is that I'd probably take as we think of those tiers going down, I think the only thing I would probably say is that I would consider the Blackmagic cameras kind of in that tier, that sub $10,000 tier. And I think you had it in C or something like that, where, a lot of those, as a user, I've used all of these cameras. Under $10,000, I would just use Blackmagic cameras. It's not like, just to be clear, I don't think that the other ones are that. And it has to do a lot with ease of use and structure. When we're on set and I need to make quick changes, and I've owned probably 20 Sonys and a lot of Canons, 10 or 15 Canons, and a fair number of Panasonics as well. And so it's not that I don't know them. I just will say that the value of what I get for the price is just way higher. The only thing that really is bothersome about the smaller ones is rolling shutters. So the one thing you want to look at if you're going to do anything that has any kind of action, having a global shutter is important. Dynamic range is important. That's what you're really paying for when you start getting into the Aries. And so when you're shooting with Aries, you're going to get the color science and the roll off and the dynamic range is just significantly better on the Aries. And that's an Alexa 4K, but there's also, the LF, the Amira, the Super 35. There's a bunch of ones in that range. And I don't know as many people like Red took over. I haven't seen Reds on set for a long time. I owned a couple. And fans were a problem. So, it was just always a fan, and so we really had problems with heat dissipation and then fan. First, they overheated a lot, and then they had fans that were too loud, and so a lot of us stopped using them for that. I do know a handful of people that are using them, but not very many. The Sony Venice is nice because it's very close in quality. I would not say it's the same quality as the Alexa. I'm sure Sony's very upset that I said that, but the Venice is not I don't think is as good as the Alexa, but it is much more practical. So if you're doing live, we tend to lean towards Venices as opposed to the Alexas, and we haven't been able to test the new Super 35 Alexa or Airy that we think could be the next gen, something that we could use for this. But the Venices can be painted a lot easier. They manage it. One thing I will say is that if you're working with Alexa and Venice or Aries and Sony's, you get used to how easy Blackmagic's change frame rate. And you want to do, if you have a 12K, you're like, you want to do 120 frames a second? Sure. You want to do 60 out and record 20, there's all these versions of that. It is not the same. Airy and Venice, they really want to do 24. They're 99% of their use case is 24 frames a second. And when you start varying the frame per second and everything else, you start getting into a world that just isn't as tested on those cameras as the Venice is a little bit more, but the Airy really gets sensitive outside of 24 frames a second. So those are things to think about in those cameras.
Yeah, and it was interesting to me. I almost added the Panavision Millennium DXL in there. That made a lot of splash when they were developing it back up at the high end, and I know a lot of cinematographers are very much into that Panavision world. That's what Hollywood rental, and most of these cameras people don't actually own. Most of these cameras at this price point are actually on lease or something like that for the nature of for the duration of a shoot for a movie. And there are very few people that own them, but they're constantly renting them in packages with everything else that the cinematographer and or DP needs to.
And one thing Jeff Keithley does point out accurately that a lot of the OB trucks and so on and so forth are using a lot of times 2/3 inch sensors, especially on big lenses, whether it's Panasonic or Sony. There's a bunch of us that Panasonic did this funny thing 15 years ago where they would tell you the sensor was doing something that it wasn't. And it was just a little softer than everybody else. And a bunch of us just stopped using Panasonic cameras. And they've stopped doing that. But we haven't gotten over it yet, that we bought cameras that were soft. Some of the early Vericams were soft. And it was because they were cheating on the sensor. And so a lot of us just never got over that with Panasonic. So a lot of us tend to lean towards Sony's when we do ENG. ENG is a whole different thing. You've got SMPTE fiber that's going out to these cameras. There's a whole pipeline. They use 2/3 because long lenses don't. When you start getting to larger sensors, it sounds great when you're really close to someone doing interviews, but when you're 300 feet or 500 feet away with a 100x lens, you don't want a Super 35 generally because the depth of field is too short. So that's another thing you have to start thinking about. That said, that there is a growing number of trucks that are starting to go towards Super 35 because a lot of the higher end productions are being infiltrated by film folks who won't use 2/3. There's this. We're seeing more and more of these kind of Super 35 trucks, Super 35 fly packs. PRG has now a Super 35. So you're seeing a move towards Super 35 for a lot of events because the film folks that are moving into TV just look down their nose at 2/3 and won't use the cameras. But folks that have grown up in broadcast are still on 2/3. But like people like me won't turn a 2/3 on.
Yeah, and it's interesting how, and I'm wondering, bubbling up from the bottom in those multicam live shoots out there are pan, tilt, zoom things, which if they go the way of all other things are going to get more sophisticated, more robotic, and how many more camera operators will be out there in position shooting. There will still be some, and those industrial level cameras and the professional broadcast cameras really sing right now in those multicam directed productions and live sports and things like that. But will that continue for the next 10 years, or will the pan, tilt, zoom and or robotic and or we're seeing the fly cam over the top of the football stadium because that's a shot you can't get with a person?
What we find, though, is that when you mix and match people and PTZs, you get the best solution. So you don't really want to give up people because the PTZs just currently can't react fast enough. And so having a person thinking on their own for every camera makes a huge difference. And so far the AI isn't good enough to do that. But what we have seen is things like Mark Roberts has I think Panasonic actually bought Mark Roberts, if I believe. And they have a follow system, which is you can actually have one person following a player running down the field, and the other cameras will just frame up that person and follow. They're following where that camera is pointed at, and so that you get 5 different angles. Now that's actually a great thing for following the ball, following the runner, following the major actor, and knowing that you have these other inputs. Nikon, Jeff, I couldn't remember. I knew someone bought Mark Roberts. I didn't know who it was. I couldn't remember who it was. So Nikon bought Mark Roberts, and so this system that I've never used, but I've seen it NAB. I keep on looking at it like, this would be great. But yeah, it looks pretty cool.
That's interesting that it was Nikon, of somebody who's, was in the standard camera DSLR and stay relevant in the modern era. Maybe that was a strategic acquisition. They're going to be more into live production and less into individual still cameras. That's why we wanted to talk today. And none of the things we bring up, we're not trying to search out the best camera in a particular class for you, unless you ask that question, and we'll do our best to it. I really just wanted to talk about the trends, what we see coming up, and what might be a reasonable thing to have in your head. So if you want to ask questions about any of the cameras, not necessarily just these, but anything in the range, please do so. Mitch had a thought before we get into the questions.
Yeah, on the tippity top of cameras, the Aries and the Sonys seem to be battling it out. The Arri LF would be a good candidate, and the Sony Venice. You can't just look at the specs on them. I talked to my business partner who works at a big rental house, and he is quick to point out that even though the Sony may beat the Arri in specs, if you just use your eyes and look at the color, like Alex has commented before, the Alexa or the Arri, the LF, just makes beautiful pictures, and it doesn't have the same low light specifications that the Sony Venice does, but it looks better. It looks more filmic, more cinematic. And the new Super 35 Arri is very interesting. What's going on there? So we're getting better sensors, better color geometry, and of course Sony continues to excel in their technical aspects of how they process the video.
Yeah, one of my friends said, there's this push for more pixels, and he said, I don't want more pixels, I want better pixels, and that's why when you look at that list, the Arri Alexa is only a 4K camera, some of the other ones are 6K or beyond, but sometimes cinematographers want to look, the color science and the way it works. Alex?
Yeah. And one other thing, another reason that people in sports are using the 2/3 inch chips is because the lenses were built for that. so yeah, the 100x lenses, 72x lenses, these giant box lenses, a lot of them are all, they're going to be B4 mounts, and they're going to, they won't cover a Super 35 sensor or full frame sensor. We have that other problem as well. So lens selection can also drive some of the camera choices. As far as better pixels, the one that has the best pixels, in my opinion, is the Canon ME20. So what they did with this is, you have to be, it's very limited in resolution. The camera, the Canon ME20, no one hears about very often, but we use it for a handful of shows. We've used it for a Nat Geo show and a couple other ones. So this is a 1920 by 1080 full frame sensor. Like, they didn't go for the resolution. They literally, and so the sensor sites are massive, and you can take images at night like that you can actually use in a broadcast. It's very close to night vision. It is, I think that the ISO is in the millions. And so it's a really, really, I mean, it gets a little grainy after you go over like 150,000 ISO, but up until then, it's a pretty smooth image, and it's something you can't see your hand in front of you, and it's shooting an image. Like, that's how sensitive it is. But that gets back to the point of the better pixels. Is what they did is and it's a very specialized camera. It's $20,000. We had 4 of the ME200s, which are the Super 35 version, that are $5,000 each, and we used them for low light shows. So if we were in a show where we didn't know how much light we would have, or it was going to be a low light studio and we didn't want to make it really bright, we wanted to keep it where it was, or mostly the client wanted to keep it where it was, we bring in these low light cameras to capture it. But it has the typical problem that Canon has, which is like the worst interface ever.
Alex, do you still have your red phone?
I do. Hold on, where is it?
What's your opinion of the pictures that little guy made?
Yeah, it does 3D pictures. That's what I like about it. That's why I still have it. It takes some. I could have sworn we were talking about it on Mac Break, and here it is. So this is the red. This is the red hydrogen. I still have it. I bought it early, which is great because I bought the titanium one, and then they sent me the other one because the titanium was behind or something. So I ended up with 2. I sent one to Andy, not Co, and then I have this one. And so, yeah, but this has 2 little lenses, so it shoots in stereo. So this is my Android phone.
There you go. So let's move on to viewer questions. First question, Mitch.
All right, from Andy Kokendorfer in Viera, Florida. Are there any cameras that automatically balance using an X-Rite or DuMonde chart? That would be a time saver.
Alex.
Oh man, we've talked about it for a long time. It doesn't seem like it seems like you could. You could just have something that is synced to a chart, and the camera would just adjust to it. And we haven't seen anybody do it. It's a great idea. We've talked about it for maybe a decade quietly, like, we should build something that automatically syncs it. But we haven't seen anybody come out with it yet. So you still have to, the closest you can get to that is to take the DuMonde chart or the X-Rite, one of the ones that's supported by Resolve. You take that chart in and then do an auto match there, and then save that out as a LUT. That's the closest that you can get to making that auto correction. It's not perfect. It's not Charles good as far as the correction goes, but it will get a lot of the cameras pretty close to each other. But yeah, getting a camera to have it built in would be magic, and we're kind of surprised that. And you could do it also. You could theoretically build a software that talks to the camera via the API that could theoretically do it on a computer. So if it saw a video feed coming in, it could make those adjustments and send it back to the computer. Just no one's done it yet.
And it's interesting, we talk about computational photography and how that's moving into computational videography. This isn't at the camera for live, but I've been working on a project for the last week where I've had a whole variety of different camera sources, literally everything from Arri RAW to Blackmagic RAW to iPhone shots. This is just, we're looking back at a variety of different programs we did. And it has astonished me, every one of those clips I've gone to replace in my timeline, because I had a timeline that was a finished piece that I've cut into this, and I'm going back to get the original shots. no matter which camera it was shot on, when I drop it into a Final Cut Pro 10 timeline, it sees the shot and says, I know how to handle that, and it drops it on my timeline with an excellent base grade. Is it perfect? Is it something that I would just turn around? Well, if it was just a simple little show for somebody, I might, but the fact that it's automatically taking all those different color sciences and giving me a reasonable approximation that I can edit with really fast amazes me, because it was always harder to do than it is for me this week. So things keep moving on. Let's go to the next question.
And he's back with another question. I plan to test out the Insta360 Link for breakout session captures at a hotel conference. Thoughts on this application?
Alex.
You'll have to get the camera pretty close. It doesn't have a zoom. It's a digital, it's a zoom into the 4K. So the most you can do is, 2X or whatever. So, most of the PTZs that we use for this kind of thing have 20X or 10X. And so you're not going to have a lot of zoom there. So if you're doing a wide shot, it is small enough that you could probably put it where the projectors are sitting and look over. For a kind of cheap and easy solution, it might work, but I don't think it's going to be the best solution that you could use there. But it'll be interesting to see. I do think that it'll be great for cooking.
Oh, yeah, an overhead camera to be able to move it around and zoom in. Oh, that'd be fabulous. That's funny. We're just watching Julia on, anyway, the Julia Child, not the old cooking shows, but there's a show now. And they just covered in last week's episode her and her producer inventing the overhead mirror. It was very cool. Let's move on to the next question.
And next question from David Brady in New York, New York. Insta360, is this camera suitable for use in Zoom rooms where remote participants and or Zoom itself can control PTZ, or is there proprietary software control involved?
Alex.
We did find that the pan tilt zoom works with the Insta360 through Zoom. So if you ask to take over control, when I had it on, when I was traveling, I think that Taylor took it over and started moving it around. So you can adjust it remotely.
Okay, the next question, and we are probably going to run out if people don't have more questions about cameras. We will do that. We'll talk in general for a little bit if we need to, but if we end early, we end early. So it's up to you guys out there. Next question.
Philip Shane in New York. Just a quick mention that you mentioned the Sony FS series, but the FX series is also worth mentioning. The FX6, which is less than $6,000, and the FX9, which is over $12,000, are respectable workhorses.
When I was picking those exemplar cameras, I realized that there was just so many possibilities that it was impossible for me to figure out which are the three most representative cameras. And you're right, Sony FS, the Sony F series cameras, I was looking for what's current, what are they selling the most of, what seems to be the hot out there. And it was really difficult with the Sony lineup because they haven't really been revved. We haven't seen any new cameras, at least I haven't, in the last couple of years. So Sony always had a wide variety of cameras. They had full scale broadcast cameras that were used even in network circumstances, the kind of box lens cameras. They had everything down to literally tiny camcorders. And there were so many possibilities that it was really hard to figure out exactly the models to pick. So I kind of just cheated on that. If you have specific models that you're interested in, I would imagine Sony's always had a really respectable reputation as a camera manufacturer. They do things really well. I don't see them as much as I used to in the specification lists that I run across for people on jobs, but that doesn't mean they're not really good cameras. Alex, you had thoughts?
I think that Blackmagic has made the sub $10,000 area really uncomfortable for a lot of people, and people have had a really hard time breaking into that. If you don't have something significantly better than a Blackmagic camera, the problem that you end up with is that it fits part of a larger ecosystem, especially if you're doing live. I think that if you're doing live events, the entire ecosystem that Blackmagic provides at the cost that it provides it at makes it very difficult. So we see more and more URSAs every day, going into these systems. The URSA broadcast right now is, I don't know, it's like $4,000 or something like that, or $4,200. It's a pretty hard to beat camera for what it does.
And how are they on audio? I've never used an URSA. Do they have balanced audio in and complex 5 or 6 channels if you need them?
Just 2, I think.
Okay.
And it's and I have to admit, we never use the Ursa. We don't use Blackmagic audio.
Yeah.
so we don't. So I don't know. Like I don't really have any. I mean, we barely. I mean, occasionally we embed in the switcher for events, but that's about it. But I don't. We don't really use their audio. They haven't figured that out yet.
Yeah, that's been my experience too. That's one of the reasons that Sony cameras were in a lot of workflows, is because they had at least respectable. I mean, I don't remember any ENG cameras that had preamps that were super, and they were workhorses, but they didn't do that at a precise level. The
hard part is that the money for broadcast and what pays for ENG is cratering. And so it's not, we see, I mean, when you're in Washington, DC, you see reporters covering with thetheir iPhones, and so a lot of what used to be an ENG crew has gone away. And so the ENG market, that mark where you showed that the big cameras, which people still use to some degree, but we definitely don't see them very often anymore, at least in what I do. We see bigger cameras like Sony's and Alexa's, probably I see them pretty often. And then we see, Blackmagics and phones, and a lot of the world in between that it's still out there, and there's still a business to be had. But everybody is like a global shutter away. I mean, if Blackmagic came out with a global shutter under $10,000, it would annihilate the market. It's just that,
and if they did an audio package that could either be bolted on or something.
I don't think they should focus on that, because I just don't think they understand it. I think that there's nothing that Blackmagic should bother with audio, because it's just even though they bought Fairlight and they have those big things, they just every time they do something with audio, it's not good. So I maybe they'll get over it. I mean, I love Blackmagic and everything. Like it's there, but we have to know where our limits are, and right now, audio is definitely a place that they're limited.
Yeah, and it's interesting. We had EFP cameras, electronic field production, where you were going to go out and shoot something, and often you had double system sound with that. So you had a sound person with you, and they were running things into a separate recorder. That's what double system means. The camera isn't responsible for sound. That's the audio guy or young lady, as the case may be. But EFP and ENG is the other side, and ENG, electronic news gathering, that's where you really needed some kind of an audio feed into a camera, because you were out there capturing sound clips to bring back to broadcast. Both of those things, everything is messed up in the middle. And I agree with Alex's point 100%. The top end is relatively stable. The bottom end is coming on fast with all this money going into the phones and the just the step up, and Blackmagic would probably fit into that. But boy, that middle, except for people like Jeff, who has to run trucks and cover events and do multiplayer production in the field, the middle is just getting squeezed really hard right now. And I hope that continues to be a solid business model there, or we're going to be stuck with the fact that if you have something that your phone and these small units won't do, you have to go all the way up and run a big monster camera.
And again, the pressure really is that more and more 2/3 inch, and the ENG is really becoming more and more of a sports only solution. So sports are still using 2/3 because of, again, lens selection and those types of things. But more and more people want Super 35 like or something bigger. And this has to do with YouTube as well, is that all the YouTubers are using full frame and Super 35 and everything else. And so people are used to seeing it that way. I noticed my kids, when they were like 7 and 8 years old, like looked at something and knew it was broadcast immediately. And I was like, why? And like, because the background's so sharp. Like to them, it was like immediate. Like they knew it wasn't a YouTuber, and they just switched away from it immediately. And that was like, oh, that was like an eye opener for me, when I have 7 and 8 year old kids that are making a decision that it's old people's TV because the background was in focus. And I was it's very interesting. But YouTube definitely, because most creators, nearly all creators, use Super 35 and above. It definitely has created it feels old when you're using those. And again, sports needs that, I think, to some degree. You can't stop down enough, and you can't get the lenses that you need, I think, to take advantage of that. But I think that that's pretty much the last place we see 2/3 is sports.
Guy Cochran is here. I didn't even know you snuck in. Guy, it's good to see you.
Snuck right in. So those FS6s and FX9s are great cameras, but one thing to remember is that you can't get them. So, it might be somewhere like a broadcast rental house where you can find these things, but keep in mind from the operator's perspective, if you're following fast-moving action, you really need to figure out where those controls are. So on this last shoot that we did, it was tough to use one of these smaller form factor cameras. So choose the right camera, with the right lens for the right moving subject or not moving subject. So with film, you can tape your mark on the ground and, have your actor repeat that. But if you have fast moving things, you need those controls. So you got to remember to choose the right package overall. And a lot of this stuff you don't have to buy, you can rent, and then you can also hire people that know these cameras inside and out. Because if you try to operate these things yourself on a gig where it really matters and screw something up, it's one of those things where you got to really get to know intimately every control, every dial, where everything's at fast. And on the bigger cameras, you can switch ND on. They have built-in ND. Like on this last shoot, we had to screw on NDs, and there's so many things to consider when choosing a camera.
Guy, you're so involved in this. What are the things that you see people asking for, or what are the things that have really worked for you in these mid-range shoots where people need more of that control?
I think people are super happy with these Blackmagic cameras, but you got to remember where are you going? Like, are you recording it? And so do you need something like RAW, and does that matter? And then what are the file sizes? So there's a whole system, behind this. So it just depends. Like Mickey says, like I was reviewing some of the Atem ISO files that we recorded, and they're about 70 megabit. And if that's good enough for you, that's good enough. So in the olden days, we would have AJA Key Pros, and we would record ProRes. But you're talking $4,000, $4,000, $4,000, $4,000, $4,000 for 4-camera plus program. I could do that now with an Atem ISO for $1,495. It's just insane where we've gone. But again, does the client accept that as a deliverable? How many viewers are you going to have watching this? So, when we look at Top Gun Maverick and we see that they use Venices, and it's like, what codec were they recording in? And, how, because anytime you create data, a lot of times you're going to have to replicate it 3 times. So there's all that copying time, there's all that checksum time, and then storage and long term. So there's so many more things that I think we need to consider. But yeah, right now because we sell Blackmagic cameras, we're just seeing a lot of Blackmagics. We started getting into the red Komodos, but even that, if you put it on the high quality, all of a sudden, you have big files, big horsepower computers that need to, edit that stuff. So if I was looking at a camera, I would get some of the download files. Like, you can go on Blackmagic site and you can download some of the raw files, and I would run it through your system, because you don't want to buy a camera, then all of a sudden you have to buy a new computer and you didn't budget for that because the files are so dang big. And so some of these even older cameras, even though they're using like AVC Intro or something old, you don't need a powerful machine to run it. So again, look through the entire workflow. Don't just buy the camera because it makes pretty pictures.
Well, and a lot of that has to do also with what you're going to do in post and how much room you have. Generally, we're capturing a lot of things. We'll capture the 709 of something that maybe is streaming in 709. So we're going to capture at 709 at 1080p, whatever we send it out as, and that's our hyperdecks are pulling those in, and usually at HQ, so we have enough to do some color correction. But our cameras are usually recording in RAW, and so it is, to Guy's point, it's generating a lot of content, terabytes of content for a 1 hour show. But that means that, for a lot of our clients, that means that we have the data to go back and really pull out all the color that was available, fix things that weren't quite right, do things that we can't do. When we record to H.264, if you're doing that with an ISO or whatever, you got to hit the mark right on, or you're not going to be able to make any significant adjustments without it breaking up, because it's a delivery format, not a archive format. And so that's the thing you have to kind of be careful of. And it just depends on how valuable, to Guy's point, how valuable is the post? Like, is the client going to go back and use it? And if they're going to go back and use it and wanted to look at it at its highest quality, then you budget time and resources to have lots of hard drives, and also to the point, editing becomes a thing. Like, for instance, I did some stuff with 6K, and it's a 6K record in RAW, 6 cameras. Just editing that required a Mac Studio, and I had to be able to get it onto the internal drive, figure out a way to get the clips onto that, because the Mac Studio, by the way, that's the one where you really want to put all the hard drive in, because you can get up to 8 terabytes. And if you put 8, that means you can put a whole, not a whole show, but a reel, so to speak, of cameras onto it, and at full quality, and then still work with them in Resolve. But otherwise, even at 2200 megs per second, we were having trouble getting it to play back, on a, through the, so it's very, to Guy's point, you do have to pay attention to that. But for a lot of my clients, the post is going to be at least as important as the live activation.
And Mitch has some thoughts in here.
Philip, I'm glad you mentioned the FX series Sony cameras. And what's kind of interesting is that across the whole line, it's in their Cinalta series. The FX3, which I'm using right here, is the entry-level baby. Then the FX6, more technical for industrial work, all the way up to the FX9 and then on to Sony Venice. What's interesting about those cameras is you could probably use my little FX3 to cut against the FX9. It's not going to quite make the same pictures, but it would make a great B-roll camera if you were shooting it as a second camera for an interview or something like that. But the other thing that I like about the Sony line, it's no secret I'm a Sony fanboy, is that if you have somebody running cameras for you and you got multiple cameras and multiple amateur camera operators, all they have to do is touch that face to get to pull a focus on somebody. It's very forgiving. So across that line, I vote for it being very simple to operate and easy to get somebody to break into it that's not a super great DP.
Fair enough. I asked for more questions, and you guys responded, and the young ladies responded, and everybody else. So thank you. We've got a good chunk of questions in here. Let's move on to the next one.
Stefan Fischer from Würzburg, Germany. Blackmagic Pocket Cinema Cameras have a different form factor compared to the other pure film cameras. Does anyone see this changing, or will this be a new trend for others?
Alex.
Blackmagic experiments with a lot of form factors. They've got their little studio cameras. They've got their the Ursas. They used to have an Ursa that was twice the size of the Ursa that we have now. Like it was like this giant. And they are not contained by a certain form factor. What I hope Blackmagic does is eventually find their way to a more boxy camera, the same way that we see with the Aries, with other things like that, the Reds. Having that as a component, basically a sensor system, is really what a lot of us would love to see Blackmagic do. It's easier for us to fit into a rig. And so what we don't see right now is that kind of boxy form factor that we can just there's a sensor and it's as small as we can make it, and then we're going to put a whole bunch of stuff around it. And so that's what we're hoping to see more of. One thing I think is missing that seem to disappear in the supply chain is the micros. And so I'm hoping that a micro, either a larger micro or just another micro that we can actually get raw out of, is maybe coming for IBC. That's where I have no inside information, only hope.
Yeah, it was so weird. I started my entire career with shoulder mount cameras. That's how I learned to shoot. And the fact that we went down to DSLRs in the body of what looked like to me like a single lens reflex camera, it was really hard to operate because it was just way smaller than I was used to. And then we got into this era of building rigs around them, and I call them Tinker Toy rigs, to make them a little more stable. I think this is it's flexible. It's hugely flexible because you can use these cameras in a lot of different configurations, but it still doesn't feel like the old days to me when a camera was thing that had heft and that made it a little easier to keep smooth. But again, at the same time, we're starting to see cameras mounted on all sorts of platforms, and these small ones are going to go into places that those big cameras never could, which means more interesting shots. So you give something and you take something away from the development of these form factors. Let's move on to the next question.
Tommy Shantz from St. Paul, Minnesota. Is Micro Four Thirds a large enough sensor for professional production?
Jason.
It depends, but no, not really.
That doesn't mean people aren't doing it, but
I'm not saying you can't. I'm saying if you could afford not to, please don't.
Alex?
So the problem with Micro Four Thirds, I mean, it's fine. I mean, you can definitely get good images out of a Micro Four Thirds. It's kind of this ugly middle, which is that you don't have the lens selection that you would have at 2/3 B4s, and you don't have the depth of field or resolution necessarily that you'd have with the Super 35. So it sits in between where you just don't get as many options as you would if you went one direction or the other. And so that's the hard part. I usually very frustrated by the lens selection for Micro Four Thirds. You end up putting a lot of adapters on it, and it just is a difficult format to work with. Can it produce professional imagery? Yeah, sure, absolutely. So it's, I mean, Star Wars was shot on a 2/3. Star Wars Episode 2 was shot on a 2/3 inch chip. So you can do a lot with it. It's but it's not again, it's just it's a difficult middle ground, especially with lens selection.
Yeah, I'm going to emphasize what Alex is saying about lenses, because one thing, all the B4 lenses that came out of the broadcast industry were all set up. They're parfocal. They have beautiful zoom rockers, and they all just work smoothly, because that's no camera operator who's working in that area will accept anything less. They're all used to it. Then we moved into this DSLR thing, and we started using still camera lenses, and everybody started putting all these, dials and gear work on to try to give them some of the capabilities that those early lenses had, particularly if, focus was a thing, because parfocal does all the focusing for you as you zoom through a zoom range. But those standard still lenses didn't do any of that. So you had to have both a zoom and a focus, and you had to coordinate them, which is much more complicated than when the machine does it for you. So as you move into these different classes, the availability of lenses becomes a big deal in terms of the class of camera you may be choosing for a particular execution of the shots. Let's move on to the next question.
Eduardo Augustine at Panama. Which cameras to get for a starting production company to get a good balance between quality and price? I'm a crew of 3, me for streaming, 1 videographer, and 1 TD.
So Guy will have some suggestions for you here. Guy?
Yeah, it's interesting because I'm seeing, what's going on in the market, and different people are choosing different things. And it's kind of funny, like my dad started with Nikon cameras, and so he has an affinity towards Nikon, and different people, once they hear like Sony, they want to stay in that ecosystem. But nowadays with different manufacturers having different size chips and different size or just different workflows. So like, for example, a camera that I would love to have if I was doing what you're doing is the Panasonic UE150. They're tough to get, but paired with a CX350, that's more the handheld form factor. So now you've got a handheld form factor where you can have an operator, with a traditional zoom control. So that's one of the things I like. If I'm shooting fast action, I like to have even a stage play or something like that. I like to have my controls, and you can get this with the Blackmagic camera. So it just depends on what ecosystem that you want to be in. Do you want to go? So for like this last shoot, we had a choice. Greg Gibson owns some of the Blackmagic studio cameras. He chose the FX3s for this particular shoot because of what Mitchell Hill is talking about, which is the autofocus. You tap on the person's face, and for that fast-moving action, it just took care of that. Especially if you have inexperienced operators, you want some things to just kind of handle themselves. It's like just point and shoot. But with the robo cameras, you can get shots and get people in places that you couldn't get. So I'd be looking at some kind of mixture because you want ideally the cameras to match. So when you cut from a RoboCam to a handheld camera or a fixed mounted position camera, that they all look the same, so that the viewer has this nice shift and isn't jarred by, one looks really cool and one looks really warm and one looks really soft and one looks really sharp. So you could mix and match cameras, but again, you run into this era of just startling your viewers. So it's really tough to say. I mean, if you're shooting stage plays, or if you're shooting sit down interviews, talking heads, it all just depends, as Mickey would say.
The reality today. Alex.
Yeah, I mean, I've owned a lot of PTZs, not the 150s, but the 120s, the BRC 900s, BRC 1000s, and use them all in those areas, as well as, a lot of other cameras for multicam. At this point, as a small crew without a lot of money, I would definitely use Blackmagic because of the ecosystem with the switcher. So being able to control those cameras, with the switcher, being able to tie them into a larger ecosystem inexpensively, I think that it's really a hard thing to beat. If you decide you want to do HDMI, I wouldn't do a lot of production with HDMI just because I find it to be very painful to run the cables. So I would, be looking at some version of an SDI solution or some of the smaller ones. But I won't do anything I can't paint. From the switcher. Like, that's the big thing. And I find that the color controls on most of the PTZs are not great.
Fair enough. Let's go to the next question.
Paul Valhus in Austin, Texas. What's the best camera set up for streaming a softball game? Think one-off event with no permanent infrastructure or power source.
That's going to be a tough one, particularly if you have no power out there. I mean, softball takes place on a baseball field. That's a pretty large area to cover. And the angles for a baseball game, I think, are particularly difficult because you want to see the players. Who are the most important players? Well, the pitcher, obviously, and that's actually the easiest shot you'll probably have, because if you set up in the dugout or behind in the, behind the cage and can get a shot of the pitcher, then all of a sudden you have a problem because the batter and or the catcher, who are also deeply involved in every play, you've got nothing on them. So if you're just talking about one camera, you're probably better off on the side. You're only going to be able to get kind of panoramic full field shots. If you can get a camera that takes a really long zoom lens, you'll have a chance of getting players, framed large enough to see the player. And that's the most critical thing always. If you're covering sports, you want to see the guy hit the ball, or you want to see the young lady make that play to second base. And so those things are incredibly important. But sports is tough, and one camera sports is even tougher. Alex has some thoughts as well.
Yeah, and we didn't say that it was one camera either. So, so you can, for best camera setup for streaming a softball game would be a 53-foot double expando with 6 ENG cameras. I mean, you didn't give us a price. You didn't say
Jeff
best.
Keithley.
You didn't say best at a price. I mean, so NEP. Think of they make some great trucks with some great cameras. You need a couple 100X or 72X. There's a lot of options there.
So, and watch, if you want to do it great, watch professional sports. They have a camera in the outfield that is such a long lens that you can literally watch the expressions full frame on the catcher.
You said best. That's all.
Best. That's right. There you go. Okay. Let's move on to the next one. Paul, hope you have a great time there.
Douglas Carmichael, Key News Network is using Blackmagic Design Ursa Broadcast G2 cameras for ENG. Not having experience with them, are they the optimal camera for ENG use?
Alex?
I think it depends. So I think, again, if you have a lot of moving parts, I think that there's better lens solutions for ENG for B4 mounts, and you can get B4 mounts for the G2, but there's a lot of really good ENG cameras in that area. So, it depends on what you're using for ENG. For a news network, I think that the G2s are really hard to ignore. If you're in a studio environment with a Super 35 camera with lenses that can be controlled and central, at that price, we're talking $4,000 a unit. Really hard to find another camera at $4,000 that's going to be as efficient for a news organization.
Fair enough. Let's move on to the next question.
Next question in from Paul Valhus in Austin, Texas. What are the accessories for a Blackmagic camera? For example, an add-on battery pack case, lens filters, etc.
They make them for all, but there's no one Blackmagic cinema camera. The pocket cinema cameras are one form factor. The Ursas are another form factor. They do make a wide range of accessories for all those form factors. In fact, there's a robust second-party and third-party ecosystem for Blackmagic accessories because the cameras are so popular. So you have to kind of, I think, define what you're going to do. And let's talk to both Guy and Alex about this. Guy, take it away.
Yeah, so cages are one of the first things that a lot of people add, and then an optional monitor. It depends on if you get like the Blackmagic Pro with the tilting monitor. That's the 6K Pro has the tilting monitor. So, and then ND. So if you don't get the Pro, you need some way of getting ND. And then of course audio is a huge thing. If you have somebody else handling your audio, then you're good to go. But otherwise, you need to pony up and figure out how you're going to get time code if you need time code. So there's so many little pieces of the puzzle. And then I always like to recommend that you put money into your tripod. I mean, if you're trying to go for a 6K and you can't, that's pushing the limit. I truthfully would rather have a 4K and get a better head, because that's what matters when you're out there and you need to follow somebody. So if you're doing action where like Eric Nathan borrowed one of our cameras, and I was like, man, I'd be floating that head. Like when you have a Miller or a Sockler, or you have something really good, it just makes those images float, and it's so smooth. Whereas if you spend all the money on a camera and then you get a $200 tripod and you look at the footage, it's just garbage. It's like trying to follow somebody. It's a train wreck. So don't spend all your money on just the camera. Look at the total budget with all the accessories, or rent.
You also did mention batteries. The 6K consumes batteries like a voracious weasel going through a cake. They're just, it's gone. Alex?
So I don't spend any money on the tripods, and here's why. I rent them. because the tripods that I want to use are so expensive that, if I'm going to have a camera operator move those tripods around, they start at like $10,000 to $15,000 for the head. So we're talking O'Connor 2060s, Sackler 2575s. Like that's like entry level for what I think is a good tripod, because that big heavy head is going to make all the difference in the world. Exactly what Guy said, but I just don't want to buy them because they're so cheap to rent. So that because the tripods last for so long, I usually will send out some tripods. I'll spend $500 or $600 on. I won't spend, if I'm it can do something at $500 or $600, like a Benro or something like that can do something if necessary. You can make fine adjustments and so on and so forth. But if I'm going to use it for someone who's actually going to follow someone walking on stage, following action, something like that, I'm renting those tripods because I can't afford the ones that I want, and they're like $150, to do that. And it's, so they're relatively cheap. I'd have to use them a lot to buy to amortize the tripods that I want.
And next question.
Next question in from Stephen Montaigne of Madison, Wisconsin. For battery-powered operation, are there advantages to one brand or another in terms of battery pack compatibility and swapping across different devices?
And Alex is going to start us, but we are running short on time, so try to keep it a couple of minutes here.
Most people, I think Anton Bauer is a little bit more popular, that we see that probably more often. I use the V-mounts because I got a camera with V-mounts and it came with it, and I bought a couple batteries so that I could use it, and then I just kept on using it. So, but Anton Bauer is probably the most popular one that I see out there.
Mitchell Hill.
Core and bebob, but the cores are hard to get a hold of right now, so you might be using bebobs.
And on a lot of the cameras, you will find a camera plate attachment point in the back of the camera, particularly for the larger cameras, not for the small ones. But you can pick and you can get both V-mount and Anton Bauer. For most of my cameras, I had both, and whatever city I flew into, I would find out what the local rental house had and then just put the right plate on the back of the camera, and I'd be fine. Next question. Ash
Yadav from New York City. How do you see NERF neural radiance fields influencing future cameras?
Jason is going to weigh in on that for us.
So the trick isn't the camera. The trick is the training of the GPU. And at its best, as far as I know, it takes several hours to several days, depending upon the complexity of the rig. So this is just a tool in the toolbox that'll become more and more tweaked. I don't think it'll actually affect the cameras, though.
And Alex has a thought.
Gathering depth data for cameras has been something people have been working on for over 20 years. So it's definitely something. The real problem you get into is occlusion. So the penumbra of an object as it relates to the camera, as well as edge detail. So where it falls off in distance, you'll see that at the edge of like your portrait mode in where some hairs aren't quite right. Getting semi-transparent edge detail is very complicated for a depth system, and those are the big challenges that people have been dealing with, and they've been the same challenges for 2 decades.
And next question.
Philip Shane in New York. A huge problem with Sony cameras these days are the supply chain. I've had an FX6 on back order now for almost a year. Any idea if things are getting better on the supply chain front for the new gear?
And Mitchell, go ahead and take it away.
Yeah, I wanted to pick up another FX3, and up until a very recent amount of time, it wasn't going to be available till next year. But now, if you go over to B&H, you'll see that your FX6 and my FX3s are available right now.
So it's interesting, supply chains, we've all been hearing the last 2 years about how much the pandemic disrupted the supply chain of everything. And, these are, as much as we like to think they're kind of regular products, these are incredibly small numbers sold in comparison to the major consumer products that get shipped all around the world. So sometimes it's very hard to get a hold of them. And then we also had the chip factory fire, and, there's all sorts of things fighting against it. Plus this idea of, the middle of the camera zone that we were talking about in the first part of this is really not in ascendance gigantically. We're seeing this consolidation at the top end and the bottom end of more and more people making choices because that's good enough for what they want to do. So the number of people buying cameras in the middle of things, I think, is going to continue to get shorter or smaller. And that means that there's going to be less manufacturing and harder to get those units. I hope I'm wrong about that, but that seems to be the way it's been going. Let's move on to the next question.
Next question from Eduardo Augustine in Panama. I'm currently using a $1.5 thousand camcorder for sports. It's a Sony AX53. Which other cameras I can get with better zoom? Looking for a 20 times optical zoom.
And Jason has an idea for you.
Okay, let me start with for size and like stability, you cannot beat the Sony FDR AX53. And I think it was so good that they actually just took it off the market because it was like for that price point, it was just really just outstanding. I think you'd have to go to the NX3, I think, but that would be constrained to 1080p. So I don't know. Not enough information, and good luck beating it.
Alex, can you do that in a minute?
Yeah, for the price, you're just going to have to find something that's going to be able to accept those kind of lenses that you're looking for are typically going to be ENG lenses, and so a B4 mount. You need something with a B4 mount, and these are going to be typically some version of an ENG camera.
Fair enough. Let's move on. Next question.
Paul Valhus, Austin, Texas. Sony, Panasonic, Canon, or what brand do you most identify with?
Alex is going to start us.
I don't really. I know that I talk a lot about Blackmagic, but these days I probably interact with shows that are using Sony Venice, Aries, probably as much or more than the Blackmagic cameras, and so those are the three that the Sony Venice, the Airy, typically the LF or Mini, and the Blackmagic cameras are the only three that I use these days.
Mitch Hill.
Sony a Venice 2 or a Ari LF. Nowadays, maybe the Super 35 when I get a chance to see it.
Fair enough. Next question.
Next question. Whoa, sorry about that. Sorry about the interruption there. From Paul Valhus again, if you had a chance to make a movie with only one camera, would you use an iPhone or a Panasonic G8 VI?
You're in the zone of what are called resume movies. You're not really making something for theatrical distribution, I'm going to assume, because you would be at a different kind of camera if you were doing that. So I will say that you will probably learn most of the same things no matter which of those two that you pick, although the Panasonic is probably going to be a little easier to rig. iPhones are notoriously difficult to rig for movie-type shots. There are ways to do it, and people successfully do that, but we don't see as many movies made with iPhone form factors as we do with little camera form factors. But Alex, your thoughts?
A G8 VI.
There you go.
It's going to look nicer.
There you go. Next question.
And it's a question in from Kenny Hampton in Greenville, Illinois. Regarding phone video camera use, Beast Grip has a nice variety of cages, anamorphic lenses, and lens adapters to accept DSLR lenses. Opinions?
Yeah, they built a good reputation over the course of time. Oh, Alex is going to.
No, I was like, I'm not familiar with Beast Grip. I know that's something I got. Most of the stuff that I use in this kind of area is small rig, and so I haven't, or I think wooden camera. But yeah, I haven't. I'm going to check it out.
Yeah, they're pretty good. They're talked about widely.
These are for smartphone.
That's one of their lines. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So they're on that top end of trying to turn your phone into something more of it, just like Small Rig has those solutions. Let's move on to the next question.
Ash Yadav from New York City. What are folks on the panel using for editing photos? Is Lightroom still the preferred option?
Jason.
Well, the short answer is yes. If I'm shooting with a DSLR, I still use Lightroom Classic, largely because I'm just really fast at it.
Alex?
I have to admit, I use Photos, Apple Photos, for keeping everything, and Photoshop to fix everything, because as Jason said, I'm pretty fast at it.
And I have moved. I used to use Photoshop. I don't have any Adobe software in my library anymore. I'm not paying for any of it. So I actually use a program called Luminar, which is an interesting piece of software because it's based on a different kind of thinking. A lot of presets and a lot of automation and they call it AI. It's not really AI, but they give you a lot of ways to solve common problems in ways that are highly acceptable and incredibly fast. So I use Luminar a good little bit. Jason Baches wants to revisit this?
One more quick thing. Photo Mechanic is also really handy.
Oh yeah, a lot of people on the pro side of photography are into Photo Mechanic big time. Guy?
Yeah, Capture One is what I'm seeing people in the Peter Hurley forums use, and we just started reselling it as well. I got a demo and started going through it, and I traditionally would use Lightroom, but I was starting to see some of the batch capabilities of Capture One, and now I see why a lot of these folks are like wedding photographers. And so that batch capability, being able to select a bunch, apply the same, sharpening, hue, saturation, color correction, and lens distortion correction, all that stuff. So I'd look at Capture One as well.
Yeah, high volume photographers. I see Capture One out there a lot. That's another one of the big names. Let's move on.
Eduardo Augustine in Panama. How to implement cinematographic styles into streaming. Tried doing an artistic movie-like shot into a wedding stream, for example, over shoulder, close-ups, etc.
I was going to try to end on time, and I think we're going to go a little bit over. Jason, really quickly, and then Alex.
Sure. Control the light if you can, depending upon your event, and if not, put it on a gimbal and get what you need.
Alex?
It's really hard. So doing cinematic, because cinematic often is short depth of field, larger frame sensors, and the reason it works in cinema is because we're shooting one shot at a time, and there's we're not trying to match them all, and we're not trying to go. Now you definitely can do some of it. What we've done is sliders are really nice because you can get subtle movement in the back area. You really have to do a lot of pre-pro of figuring out where your camera lines are. So in a wedding, the problem is that you're working with a wedding person, and they've got a bunch of ideas of how they want to do it. If you have the leverage, then you say where the cameras are going to go. If you don't have the leverage, it's going to be very hard to get a really cinematic view without it looking pretty rocky. But I've worked on a handful of weddings where they wanted short depth of field and they wanted all those bits and pieces. But what they had to do is give us basically control over how it was going to be laid out. So we controlled sight lines, and again, the budget was significantly bigger than a wedding videographer for shooting the wedding. That's what they cared about, was a video that they'd walk away with. And so in that case, we had, a 6-camera shoot, and we told everybody where the cameras needed to go, and then they had to clear things out to give them. So you just got to decide whether you're covering an event or you're doing a broadcast, and people get to show up. And that's when you can really start to get cinematic about it for a live stream. There's definitely lots of people who do cinematic for post, because you can just shoot 20-1 or 50-1 and get the best stuff.
So we've got 2 more questions, and we're already at the top of the hour. So as quick as we can, we're going to just do one person very quickly. Let's go to the next question.
Eduardo asks, I use Canon cameras and then was introduced to Sony cameras and camcorders. How hard is it to go back to other brands? Which brands and cameras have a similar look, color as Sony without the Sony price tag?
Jason?
Blackmagic has legendarily easy menus, and they've spent a lot of time making them as good as they possibly can be. I think you'd be very, you could move very easily. And the nice thing is you can match them with just about anything with a little bit of work.
All right, next question.
Paul Valhus from Austin, Texas. What is the next big thing in camera AI?
And Jason's going to finish up for us real quick.
The next big thing is what's already here. It's the use of the structured light with the unstructured light. It's, getting the depth finding and, being able to use all the cameras together and tightly integrating them and making things easy and quick.
That'll wrap it up for us today. Great job, everyone on the panel. Wonderful information. Hope all of you who are watching and or listening enjoyed it. It is time to roll the credits. We will see you tomorrow for the next show, and then Saturday and Sunday, and be back with you again on Monday. So thank you for joining us on Office Hours.
Good hustle.
And Preto the bird came in for his bow.
I don't have anything to say, except I still whisper. Just talking over the credits is horrible.
I was 1.5 minutes long, and I so told myself I was going
cares?
to end on
Who
time.
cares?
I know, but it's,
It's actually not a good idea to rush the end of it, because it's the only time we're going to talk about it. So I don't